Welcome to the Silent Chronicles.
What if I told you that the largest European war since World War II is happening right now, reshaping global politics, economies, and the very idea of national sovereignty? This isn't a history lesson about the past, it's a present-day reality with daily developments that affect us all, from the price of gas to the stability of international law. We're talking about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, a conflict defined by intense battles, advanced military technology, and the unwavering resilience of a nation fighting for its existence. To understand how we got here and where this might be going, we need to unravel a complex story of history, politics, and human courage. But before we dive deep into the trenches of this conflict, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss our in-depth analysis on this and other critical global events. Ready? Let's start at the beginning, long before the first shots were fired in 2022. The roots of this conflict stretch back decades, even centuries, tied to the complex relationship between Russia and Ukraine. For much of its history, Ukraine was under the influence or direct control of larger powers, most notably the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared its independence, a move overwhelmingly supported by its people in a referendum. This was a pivotal moment. For the first time in generations, Ukraine was a sovereign nation, free to choose its own path. However, from Moscow's perspective, an independent, westward-leaning Ukraine was seen as a strategic threat and a historical injustice. This tension simmered for years, punctuated by events like the 2004 Orange Revolution, where Ukrainians protested a fraudulent election to demand a more democratic government. The real turning point, however, came in 2014. After months of pro-European protests known as the Euromaidan Revolution, Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, fled the country. Russia responded swiftly and decisively. In a move that shocked the world, Russian forces, initially unmarked and known as Little Green Men, seized control of the Crimean Peninsula, a region in southern Ukraine. Following a controversial and internationally unrecognized referendum, Russia formally annexed Crimea. Simultaneously, a conflict erupted in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Russian-backed separatist forces declared the creation of two breakaway people's republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. What followed was an 8-year-long war of attrition. It was a brutal, grinding conflict fought in trenches reminiscent of World War I, but largely contained to eastern Ukraine. The world watched, sanctions were imposed on Russia, but life in most of Ukraine continued with a semblance of normalcy, even as the country's soldiers fought and died on the front lines. The Minsk Agreements, a series of international peace talks, were signed to try and end the fighting, but they ultimately failed to bring a lasting peace. All of this was the prelude to the main event. In the months leading up to February 2022, Russia began a massive military buildup along Ukraine's borders, all while denying any plans to invade. World leaders engaged in a flurry of diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the situation, but it was to no avail. On the morning of February 24, 2022, the world woke up to the news it had dreaded. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation, and shortly after, missiles began to rain down on cities across Ukraine, including the capital, Kyiv. Russian ground forces poured across the border from the north, east, and south. The full-scale invasion had begun. Russia's initial plan was likely a swift, blitzkrieg-style operation aimed at capturing Kyiv within days, overthrowing the government of President Volodymyr Zelensky, and installing a pro-Russian puppet regime. The attack on Kyiv was spearheaded by elite Russian airborne units who attempted to seize Hostomel Airport, a key strategic airfield just outside the capital. They expected the Ukrainian military to collapse quickly and the government to flee. But they were profoundly mistaken. The Ukrainian resistance was ferocious and surprisingly effective. Regular army units, territorial defense forces, and ordinary citizens armed with whatever they could find put up a heroic defense. The battle for Kyiv became a defining moment in the early days of the war. Ukrainian forces, using a combination of conventional tactics and guerrilla warfare, ambushed Russian columns, destroyed tanks with Western-supplied anti-tank missiles like the Javelin, and prevented the encirclement of the capital. The now famous phrase "Russian warship, go F yourself," uttered by Ukrainian defenders of Snake Island, became a global symbol of Ukraine's defiance. After a month of brutal fighting and heavy losses, Russia's advance on Kyiv stalled. Faced with logistical nightmares and unexpectedly stiff resistance, the Russian military was forced into a humiliating retreat from the north of Ukraine. They left behind a trail of devastation, particularly in towns like Bucha and Irpin, where evidence of widespread atrocities and war crimes against civilians shocked the world. With the failure to capture Kyiv, Russia shifted its focus. The Kremlin announced a new primary objective: the liberation of the Donbas region. This marked the beginning of the second phase of the war, a brutal and attritional struggle centered in eastern and southern Ukraine. The fighting became a relentless artillery duel, with both sides expending vast amounts of ammunition. Cities like Mariupol, a strategic port on the Sea of Azov, were besieged and virtually destroyed. The siege of the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, where a small contingent of Ukrainian defenders held out for weeks in a labyrinth of underground tunnels, became another epic symbol of resistance. Throughout this period, international support for Ukraine solidified. The United States, the United Kingdom, and European Union countries began supplying Ukraine with increasingly sophisticated and powerful weaponry. This started with anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles and has since grown to include long-range artillery systems like HIMARS, advanced air defense systems, and main battle tanks like the Leopard 2 and Abrams. This military aid has been crucial in enabling Ukraine to not just defend itself but also to launch its own counteroffensives. In late summer and fall of 2022, Ukraine stunned the world again. They launched a surprise counteroffensive in the Kharkov region in the northeast. In a matter of days, Ukrainian forces broke through Russian lines and liberated thousands of square kilometers of territory, sending Russian troops into a disorganized retreat. Shortly after, in the south, they successfully liberated the city of Kherson, the only regional capital Russia had managed to capture since the start of the full-scale invasion. These victories were a massive morale boost for Ukraine and demonstrated its ability to conduct successful large-scale offensive operations. However, the war is far from over. Russia, despite its setbacks, still controls a significant portion of Ukrainian territory in the east and south. In response to its military failures, Moscow has resorted to a strategy of attrition and terror. It has conducted massive missile and drone strikes against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, targeting power plants, water supplies, and residential buildings in an attempt to break the will of the Ukrainian people, especially during the harsh winter months. Russia also mobilized hundreds of thousands of new soldiers to replenish its depleted ranks, throwing them into brutal, meat-grinder battles for small gains in places like Bakhmut. The human cost of this war is staggering. Tens of thousands of soldiers on both sides have been killed or wounded. Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes, creating the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. The economic consequences are global, disrupting supply chains for grain and energy, and contributing to inflation around the world. The conflict has also led to a historic realignment of geopolitical alliances. Finland and Sweden, long committed to military neutrality, made the historic decision to join NATO. The alliance itself has been re-energized, bolstering its eastern flank against potential Russian aggression. As we look at the state of the conflict today, it has settled into a grinding war of attrition along a vast front line. Ukraine conducted a major counteroffensive in the summer of 2023, facing heavily fortified Russian defensive lines, complete with extensive minefields, trenches, and anti-tank obstacles. Progress has been slow and costly, highlighting the immense difficulty of breaking through such prepared defenses. The war is now being fought on multiple fronts: on the battlefield with tanks and artillery, in the air with drones and missiles, and on the global stage through diplomacy, sanctions, and information warfare. The outcome remains uncertain and will likely depend on several key factors: the sustainability of Western support for Ukraine, the ability of both sides to maintain their manpower and equipment, and the political stability within Russia itself. This conflict is a stark reminder that major interstate wars are not a relic of the past. It's a fight for the principles of sovereignty and self-determination against aggression. The story of Ukraine's resistance is a powerful testament to the human spirit's desire for freedom. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into one of the most significant events of our time. The situation is constantly evolving, and we'll be here to cover it. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay safe, and see you in the next one.